what is up, YouTube? It's Richie from Boston. It's the 21st of July. It's 2017, and yes, I saw this as well. Now, I saw this article when it first came out on the 13th, but lots and lots of people keep sending this to me, so here's my take on this. CIA agent confesses on deathbed that we blew up World Trade Center 7 on 9/11. Well, yeah, we pretty much already knew that, but right off the bat, let's start paying attention. There's a 3-6. Just right, I mean, I haven't even started reading yet, and right off the bat, what did I tell you yesterday? What do I tell you every time? You constantly, consistently, and always find this encoded in here, one way or the other, but I digress. 2 6s right there. At any rate, okay. 79-year-old CIA agent has made a series of astonishing claims, blah, blah, blah. He said that 9/11 was he said that the World Trade Center 7 was a controlled demolition, the third building that was destroyed on 9/11. So he worked for the CIA 36 years, claimed he was tapped by senior CIA agents, which would mean George Herbert Walker Bush, but I digress. Trained as a civil engineer, he became an explosives expert after being headhunted by the CIA in early 1980s. He says the extensive experience in planting explosive items on as small as cigarette lighters and as large as 80-floor buildings. That's crazy. Now, he trained as a civil engineer. He became an explosives expert after being headhunted by the CIA, which means Herbert Walker Bush or one of his skull and bones cronies found this guy and said, we're going to need you for an operation that's coming up. Because believe it or not, 9/11 was in the planning. I'm going to guess as soon as they killed John F. Kennedy. Just my guess. I could be completely wrong. Mr. Howard says the World Trade Center 7 operation is unique among his demolitions, as it was the only demolition that we had to pretend wasn't a demolition job. He claims he had no problem going through with the deception at the time because when you are a patriot, you don't question the motivation of the CIA or the White House. You assume the bigger purpose is for a greater good. They pick good, loyal people like me, and it breaks my heart to hear the shit talk. Now think about that. Think about that sentence right there. You assume, when you're a patriot, you don't question the motive of the CIA or the White House. You assume the bigger purpose is for a greater good. How many people in government right now are still in that mindset? And it's a good mindset. It just doesn't apply anymore. They used it up, and they used up these people, but I digress. Explaining how the building was brought down, Mr. Howard said it was a classic controlled demolition with explosives. We used superfine, military-grade, nanothermite composite materials as explosives. The hard part was getting thousands of pounds of explosive fuses and ignition mechanisms into the building without causing too much concern. But almost every single built office in the Building 7 was rented by the CIA, the Secret Service, and the military, which made it easier. He explained the building was loaded with explosives in strategic places in the month leading up to the day that changed the course of history. When the building came down, he was quoted as saying it was such a rush. Everything went exactly as planned. It was so smooth. Everybody was evacuated. Nobody was hurt in World Trade Center 7. We were celebrating. We kept watching replays of the demolition. We had the whiskey and cigars out, and all of a sudden the strangest thing happened. We all started to worry that it looked a bit too smooth. We watched it again and again and again and started to get paranoid. It looked like a controlled demolition, and they thought, shit, people are going to question this. And after we heard that the people from the street were reporting they heard explosions and that the BBC botched their report, they knew the gig was up. Now, this is a great little thing. This happens every year. Some sort of CIA guy comes out and explains everything. But the only problem with this entire thing is he's going, yeah, we did take down World Trade Center 7. And that's it. He's not mentioning the Twin Towers at all. They took down all 3 of those buildings. They took down all 3 of those buildings because they wanted to steal the gold that was underneath it. And that is a fact.
And now for the last question of all. Why would our government do such a thing? I hope you're sitting down. First, we have Larry Silverstein, the man who purchased the World Trade Center in July 2001. After September 11th, Silverstein demanded $7.2 billion from his insurers, claiming that each plane counted as a separate act of terrorism. However, on December 6th, 2004, the courts only reward him with $2.2 billion. Next, we have the put options that were placed on United Airlines, American Airlines, and Boeing. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, more than $2.5 million has remained unclaimed. As for 9/11 itself, Reuters reported that Comvar, a German computer company, is responsible for helping companies and accountants in New York restore their data from over 400 hard drives that were recovered from the World Trade Center's rubble. Comvar recovered information from 32 different computers that suggested insider trading took place on 9/11. Richard Wagner, an expert at Comvar. There is a suspicion that some people had advanced knowledge of the approximate time of the plane crashes in order to move out amounts exceeding $100 million. They thought that the records of their transactions could not be traced after the mainframes were destroyed. After their analysis, Comvar handed the results over to the FBI. Although the FBI was legally bound to investigate who was responsible, to date they have done no such thing. Moving on. According to Wikipedia, one of the world's largest gold depositories was stored underneath the World Trade Center. In 1993, the value of the gold was estimated at $1 billion, rumored to be owned by Kuwaiti interests. When the World Trade Center was destroyed, the amount of gold far exceeded the 1993 levels. The gold was finally recovered in its entirety in late 2001. Or was it? On November 1st, 2001, the Times Online reported that a large amount of gold was discovered in the wreckage of the World Trade Center. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani announced that more than $230 million was recovered from Ground Zero. However, the COMEX Metals Trading Division was storing gold bars for the Bank of Nova Scotia, Chase Manhattan Bank, Bank of New York, Hong Kong, and Shanghai Banking, totaling $950 million. And that's just one company. Rumor has it that over $160 billion in gold was stored in the World Trade Center. So where did all the gold go? Remember the gold that was found in November 2001? Reuters reported that it was discovered in the back of a 10-wheel truck, along with several cars, in a delivery tunnel underneath World Trade Center 5. No bodies were recovered. As workers got closer to the gold, authorities began restricting access to Ground Zero, joined by FBI and Secret Service agents. One worker, who was directed away from the tunnel, told a reporter, "If I tried to go down there, they would have shot me." Heavy machinery operators and others worked under the watchful eye of more than 100 armed officers. So let me get this straight. Gold from World Trade Center 4 was found underneath World Trade Center 5 in an empty delivery truck with an empty escort of cars. I think it's safe to say that they were running away from the South Tower. The question is, how did they know to flee from their stash when not even the firefighters inside the South Tower expected it to collapse?
Now, in this deathbed confession, Mr. Howard claims he has no direct knowledge about the destruction of North and South Towers of the World Trade Center, explaining that CIA operations are very specific. Now, we've heard this before with NASA. We've heard this before with a lot of different things. In the little clip I just played you, you saw that the newspapers were questioning this. Well, after 9/11, and thanks to the Patriot Act, and thanks to the fact that the elites have bought up all the media, nobody questions anything anymore. So the story hasn't just died off. They've just controlled the narrative for so long that people don't even remember that this happened. Now, according to Mr. Howard, he says, follow the money. When you want to find out who's behind something, just follow the money. Look at the trades made just before 9/11. These guys knew what was coming. The sons of CIA agents, government officials, close relatives of the most powerful men in America, Cheney, Rumsfeld, they all got rich. It wasn't just the contracts awarded to their friends in the construction business and the wars and the kickbacks. It was insider trading. Now, a lot of people have covered this ad nauseum, as I have. This is not the first time I put up information like this, but it never actually goes anywhere. It's the CIA. It's the same people that killed Kennedy. In my estimation, when they killed Kennedy, that was the beginning of their march towards the great work, towards the new world order. These guys have seen this coming, and every year they put out disinfo. So imagine this. You think that this is a groundbreaking thing, that a CIA agent came forth on his deathbed to explain about the World Trade Center 7. You have to understand that they work in quantum ways right now. They give people a little bit, and it still keeps the eyes off the North and South Towers. Both of those buildings that went down, including the World Trade Center 7, making 3 with 2 airplanes, all of it was for what we're looking at, what we're looking right down the barrel of right now, in my opinion. At any rate, Richie from Boston, I am going to play the Corbett Report and one of my favorite YouTube channels that you really don't hear much from anymore, the Alien Scientist, to wrap this video up.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world, using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the budget analyst office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly, answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her. And her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about...
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
And...
They took the babies out of the incubators.
And...
Mobile production facilities.
And...
The rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever.
Now, many people don't even remember 9/11 anymore because there's a lot of people coming in right now that are just waking up, and this is old news or they didn't live through it. You have to understand, 9/11 was the halfway point. 9/11 was the declaration that they were going to continue pushing forward for the project for a new American century with the Patriot Act and the complete blackout of the media. This activity on 9/11, September 11th, 2001, allowed them to do what they're doing today, right down to the transgender, right down to the vaccines, right down to the chemtrailing, and more. If you really want to know who's behind 9/11, listen to this. I implore you to like, share, and subscribe this video everywhere. I know it happened a long time ago, but what happened on 9/11 is a direct link to what's happening in our country right this minute. And for those that are still confused, thinking, I've seen Popular Mechanics, I've seen everybody debunk 9/11, that it was just a lack of imagination, listen to this video. This man knows what he's talking about.
It's been 10 years since 9/11 happened, and we are left with hundreds, if not thousands, of unanswered questions about the 9/11 attacks. A transparently fraudulent 9/11 Commission report, which purposely failed to even mention the collapse of World Trade Center 7, and a host of ridiculous, so-called debunking websites, forums, and other literature, which have done absolutely nothing over the past 10 years to debunk anything other than cleverly selected strawman arguments, and have failed to stem the constant flow of new 9/11 information, which researchers have been uncovering and bringing out to the public. Instead, they continue to label truth seekers, including family members of people who died on 9/11, as conspiracy theorists, and devise clever propaganda designed to prevent the general public from looking any further into the evidence or the actual claims of the so-called conspiracy theorists. In this video, we will take a deeper look into the so-called investigations, which have provided us with the official story, and why they deserve a more thorough examination. The Bush administration initially delayed a 9/11 investigation for 13. A week after 9/11, letters containing anthrax spores were mailed to several news media offices and 2 senators who were perhaps a bit too vocal about opening an official investigation into 9/11. The anthrax used in the attacks was identified as an Ames strain, which means it had to have come from the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases at Fort Detrick, Maryland. A member of that institute, Jerome Hauer, managed the National Institute of Health response to the anthrax attacks. Coincidentally, Hauer also warned the White House to start taking Cipro, an antibiotic which is effective against anthrax, a week before the attacks. Jerome Hauer also happened to be a managing director at Kroll Associates, which ran security at the World Trade Center up until the weekend before 9/11, when that role was personally handed off by Hauer to FBI agent John O'Neill, who would later die in the attacks, drawing strong suspicion that he was set up due to his knowledge of Al-Qaeda and the 9/11 hijackers, whom he was blocked from investigating while he was working at the FBI. In January 2002, President Bush personally asked Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle to limit the congressional investigation into the events of September 11th. The Bush administration only formed the 9/11 Commission after being prodded by the victims' families, who lobbied Congress for over a year to open the investigations. When the Bush administration finally did open a 9/11 investigation, it was described by some members as set up to fail.
The President has said only a minority of the Commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the Commission with the White House.
If you're one of those 4 that gets to see these documents, would that change your opinion?
No. They don't want any more eyeballs to see their documents than they can possibly get away with. It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting.
They even attempted to appoint Henry Kissinger, a known cover-up mastermind, as head commissioner. He resigned after victims' family members asked him sensitive questions about his connections to the bin Laden family and the Carlyle Group. Philip Zelikow wrote the conclusions for the report before the investigation ever began, and even then any areas which did not support the official story were neither mentioned nor investigated by the 9/11 Commission. 6 out of 10 members of that commission have discussed on record how the government lied about the official story, and 70% of the questions posed by the victims' families were never answered or officially investigated. Instead of answers, we've witnessed a barrage of accusations, which have taken anyone who asks questions about 9/11, including over 1,500 professional architects and engineers, as well as family members of people who were murdered that day, and labels them as conspiracy theorists. Instead of detailed investigations which leave no stone unturned, we have instead gotten popular mechanics and a barrage of so-called debunking media and literature, including a 10,000-page overly complicated and redundant scientific report by the National Institute of Standards and Technology based solely on unreleased and never peer-reviewed computer models, as opposed to actual physical data, debris, and evidence. It's important to look at what happened to the evidence from 9/11. The day of 9/11, most of the FBI was in Monterey, California on an agency retreat. This was essential for keeping the more experienced and honest members of the agency as far away from the crime scene as possible, while other agency insiders could be assigned to the investigations before their counterparts returned. Federal authorities such as FEMA and the CIA took immediate control over the crime scene and began whisking away evidence that very same night. Turner Construction, one of the primary contractors at Ground Zero, occupied the 38th floor of the North Tower and was involved in performing the fireproofing upgrades inside the towers. It has been noted that these upgrades were completed in the 3 years before 9/11 on floors that match up almost identically to the floors of impact and failure on 9/11. Once the cleanup was fully coordinated, the operations were consolidated under the control of 2 primary contractors, AMEC Construction Management and Bovis Lend-Lease. These are the 2 companies that were originally assigned to the areas of Ground Zero that included the North Tower, AMEC, and the South Tower, Bovis. A truly surprising fact is that at the time of the attacks on 9/11, AMEC had just completed a $258 million refurbishment of Wedge 1 of the Pentagon, which is exactly where American Airlines Flight 77 impacted that building. Arguments over the size of the hole of the Pentagon and whether it was a plane or a missile are, in my opinion, a convenient distraction from the much bigger picture of why that section of the building was targeted and by whom. On September 10, 2001, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld announced that $2.3 trillion in unadjusted funds were missing from the Pentagon budget. The very next day, the offices whose responsibility it was for tracking that money down were destroyed when American Airlines Flight 77 impacted that very section of the building. The only off-site backup for the Pentagon's black budget financial records was a secure federal office building in the World Trade Center complex. Strangely, it too was destroyed on 9/11. World Trade Center 7 was the largest CIA headquarters outside of Langley, Virginia, and housed offices involved in several large-scale federal investigations into massive stock market and accounting fraud. Not surprisingly, World Trade Center 7 was the first to be cleaned up and the evidence destroyed at Ground Zero. So it appears that not only was there a cover-up after 9/11 to control the crime scene, destroy the evidence, and hide the truth about what really happened that day, but there were also cover-ups of earlier crimes which took place on the day of 9/11. It also appears that there were quite a few people who were killed in the 9/11 attacks themselves in order to prevent them from speaking out after the attacks. FBI agent John O'Neill, of course, but also several of the names of people aboard Flight 77 into the Pentagon who had top-secret clearances and apparently knew too much. The Twin Towers were also full of a shady host of characters with connections to military-industrial contractors, petroleum interests, the Department of Energy, financial institutions, intelligence agencies, and coincidentally, of course, the Bush crime family. These people obviously do not want to be investigated, and would much rather have people waste their time arguing over pointless 9/11 anomalies like airplane crashes and controlled demolitions. They absolutely don't want people to follow the money or to start fingering suspects and naming names and connections. There's already a host of disinformation agents out there pointing researchers in the wrong directions. So here we are 10 years later, no legitimate investigation, multiplying layers of disinformation and various conspiracy theories, and the so-called 9/11 debunkers who consistently misrepresent the evidence brought forth by serious investigators. Here's Jim Meggs of Popular Mechanics promoting his new book on Fox News.
How many times did we hear that Building 7 was professionally demolished?
And that was a tough one because because that building was not hit by a plane. In the end, it was proven that it was the result of prolonged fires that weakened the internal structure of the building.
And of course, Rosie O'Donnell famously said, with that, it's the first time in history that fire melted steel.
Appendix C of the FEMA report shows one of the only studied pieces of World Trade Center 7 steel and clearly indicates sulfide eutectic formation and intergranular melting, which could not have possibly occurred in a fire. And no experiments have ever been performed which show that it is possible to melt and sulfidate steel in this manner, using fires and drywall gypsum, which contains small amounts of sulfur. Listen as Jim Meggs uses this same fallacious sidestep tactic, which can be found on numerous debunking websites, as well as Michael Shermer's article from Scientific American, all of which completely avoid the evidence that steel actually melted at the World Trade Center, and instead claim that the steel didn't need to melt for the building to collapse and the official story to be true.
A lot of people had a hard time understanding how buildings could fall down as a result of fire, but what we found is it doesn't take temperatures high enough to melt steel. It just has to heat up the steel so it expands and then softens and weakens the structure until it collapses.
Okay.
That may be true, but you still didn't explain how the World Trade Center 7 steel from Appendix C of the FEMA report was melted with holes through it like Swiss cheese, for God's sake.
And one of the new things in this particular update that you've got is there are some guys who claim to have collected some air samples. And in that air sample was what?
Some dust. They call it nanothermite. Now, thermite is a compound that if you apply it in a certain way, it can actually melt metal in certain conditions. And they're claiming they've given up on the idea there were bombs in the building. That was the original claim. Now they're saying, oh, there was some kind of nanothermite. And of course, you talk to demolition experts, the whole idea is ridiculous.
Interesting. Popular Mechanics is now claiming that it is ridiculous to think that thermite could be used to demolish a steel structure. Yet in the November 1935 issue of Popular Mechanics, it describes how the Skyride Tower in Chicago was demolished in that very same manner, by engineers using thermite to melt through the vertical steel columns and collapse the structure. Pretty ridiculous, eh?
But what it shows is how the conspiracy theories keep evolving as one gets knocked down. They never change their conclusions. They just come up with new evidence.
That's probably because there's so much evidence, which we will continue to compile and make public until the truth is known and the perpetrators are brought to justice.
Now they're literally claiming their best evidence is grains of dust found in the street near ground.
As if the size of the evidence has anything to do with how important it is. DNA is even smaller than the nanothermite particles which can be found uniformly throughout samples of World Trade Center dust. Yet DNA is used routinely to convict criminals in court cases all over the world. Just like the nanothermite evidence from the World Trade Center dust will someday convict the 9/11 criminals.
Okay, so back to the article. One more time, I can't help but notice that this is basically directing people's attention away from the two towers and specifically onto the World Trade Center 7. So it's like, yeah, we did do that, but there was a good reason for it. The one thing I can't help but notice is something wasn't right and no good has come from this. This isn't the America they envisioned. Well, the people that had guys like this, if this guy's even real, do this thing, this is exactly the world that they envisioned, because they are bringing in a Luciferian, satanic, anti-God, pro-technology, one world order, one world religion, and one world military. And it's all going perfectly. At any rate, like, share, and subscribe, because this will be stalled by YouTube, if not taken down entirely. Richie from Boston, links to the Corbett Report, links to Alien Scientist, and links to this website, yournewswire.com, will be in the descriptions. And I am out.